Welcome back, everyone. Today we are reviewing one of our favorite things, especially Brittany's, and that is Star Trek.
It's been a while since we've had a new Star Trek TV show, and Star Trek Discovery is the latest one, and the first season just ended this past weekend.
And so we wanted to give you guys a review of the first season as a whole. I know it's had some mixed reception, and so we wanted to give our take on it, and as well, all of our TV shows reviews on this channel are always spoiler-filled because there's just too much in these shows that you have to talk about spoilers.
However, if you haven't watched the show yet, go watch it. We give it a glowing recommendation, so go do that and then come back to this review.
Yeah, there's your review. Go watch it.
The time period in the Star Trek universe for this show is, I believe, 10 years before Captain Kirk comes on scene. So it's very close to the original series, timeline-wise.
Which I was surprised that they were going to do something so close to the original. And we'll get into some things, but they do tie in big time to those characters and places.
So speaking of characters, let's talk about them.
So the lead character of the show, Michael Burnham, I think the actor who played her did a really good job.
First of all, we have a woman, and not only a woman, but a woman of color as the main character, which is fantastic. And also, I was really surprised by how well she did. I really don't like her in The Walking Dead, but she was excellent in this, which really surprised me. I was kind of hesitant at first just because I haven't really loved her performances pre this show, but I think she did an excellent job.
Yeah, I think that it was very clear that that was on the writers of The Walking Dead and not on the actress. I think she did a really good job. She brought a ton of emotion to it, and she created a really interesting character. I mean, obviously she was written well, but she portrayed this character really, really interestingly.
She's very similar to Spock. She's human, but she was raised under the Vulcans. So she has the Vulcan, logical side of thinking, but it's not ingrained in her. It was taught to her. So she has this weird mix of human and Vulcan elements, just like Spock does. However, she's very much her own character, but she is very connected to Spock because Spock's parents are her adoptive parents. Mm-hmm. It's very interesting.
Which is a huge plot point in the show for her character, but overall, I think, yeah, that unique history, while is, I guess, not the newest thing to come into the Star Trek galaxy. I think we've had humans and Vulcan combos before, and Spock is half human, half Vulcan himself. But I think it is an interesting component where you get to see her war with the logic versus the feeling. And interestingly enough, her father, the Vulcan, is often the one being follow your feelings.
She's also a very flawed character, and that is established from the first two episodes. The first two episodes play very much like a movie, which was interesting, and the first two episodes are very separate from kind of the rest of the tone of the show, I would say. It's very much like this pilot movie type thing.
Yeah, I would agree. The first couple episodes definitely don't give you an idea, I guess, of the overall tone of this season. You kind of have to keep going for them to start digging into all these characters.
Which may have been why a lot of people were turned off by it at the beginning, because it's very different for a Star Trek TV show. It was much more similar to the J.J. Abrams movies, which I love, but some people don't.
Another large character on the show is Saru, which plays the first officer on the Discovery for most of the show, sometimes the captain, and he's played by Doug Jones, who does a really good job.
Which, if you watch any of our recent videos at all, we love Doug Jones, so you should know that by now.
He's a really tall, weird-looking guy, and they put him in weird-looking suits, and he does so good.
Yeah, he was, the first couple episodes, you don't really get a feel for his character very much, but he definitely develops very strongly, as do majority of the characters, and he is just such a fascinating addition. He's much more traditional captain-like than Michael Burnham is, which Michael isn't a captain at really any point legitimately in this show. So, it's very interesting that our main character is not the captain. That's something very different from most Star Trek shows, if not all of them.
One of our favorite characters of the show so far is Tilly, and she plays an engineer science officer, and her development is really good in the show.
She starts off as Burnham's roommate, essentially, and she's very timid but very smart, and just an interesting character that you don't really get a feel for, or you categorize into a certain box at first based on her character, but then she develops so incredibly well throughout the season. She, I think, is my top favorite of the entire show by the end of the season, honestly.
And she has some points where she has to pretend to be like captain of the ship and stuff, and she does so well with it. And that's her dream, is to become a captain, that you're like, okay, I can see it, where at the beginning of the show, it was like almost a joke. Like, I could never see that. And in fact, in the finale, there's a scene where she's like pretending to like sell weapons off, like being a weapons dealer, and she's like, this is and the rest of them are like, what is going on? She gains a lot of confidence.
She has a very large range as a character, and I think that this show can do so much with that going forward. We also have Lieutenant Stamets, who is another science officer, right? Medical officer?
Yeah, he's like the head science officer, and he's played by Anthony Rapp, and I think he did a good job too.
He's great. I really enjoyed his character. Again, he's one that you can't really place or pinpoint at the beginning. I think that kind of explains the first few episodes of the season. You don't really know what you're getting from these characters. They don't really start to gel together as like a team and as individual characters until a few episodes in. And his character arc, I think, is the most vital, maybe, to the series. Besides Burnham's, yeah. He is extremely important to the plot, and his character goes through a lot, and it's really fascinating to see where his character goes. And he performs this character extremely well. It was very believable and just excellent all around.
I think the plot of this season of Discovery and the first season of Discovery has been so interesting because, like we said, it is very different from your typical like Star Trek show that starts off with almost like serialized adventures and things like that. And even the more episodic versions of like Star Trek are still kind of that way. There's a lot of like bottle episodes and little things. And this one's not that way at all. The plot carries through every episode, and you don't really get like a full-fledged team until like the end of this season.
Yeah, well, I would say it starts to really gel about halfway through the season, which is a big turning point for the show. But I saw someone on Twitter describe this season as watching 5 movies in a row, and I would wholeheartedly agree with that. Like, that's completely what it feels like. It's these full-fledged, fleshed out, like, plot lines that aren't just individual one-off episodes, like Steven said. And this show, like we said earlier, has those first 2 episodes that's very much like an encapsulated movie style. And then after that, the first half of the season is weird. Like, I did not expect the first half of the season. It's completely different from any Star Trek show I've ever seen, and I've seen all of them. And it was weird. And I think a lot of people were turned off by that. They wanted their classic Star Trek. And I loved it. But then, halfway through...
Yeah, I felt like then they started to bring in a lot more of those classic elements.
Yeah, they completely flipped it about halfway through the season to a completely different direction than you expected it to go in.
Which I believe you could pretty much like separate. Yeah, it's like little movies where every like 2 to 3 episodes you could cut off and kind of call it its own saga of like, oh, you have like them like learning to be together saga, and then the alternate universe saga, and then the Lorca saga, which we'll get to all those points. But I did feel like the beginning was very strong for both of us. I know it turned a lot of people off, but for both of us, we really enjoyed it. I really liked where the characters were going, and it was so character focused because even from the get-go, you weren't getting a lot from these characters, but you could tell they had depth.
Yeah, it does follow traditional Star Trek in that sense where it is very character driven. Pretty much all Star Treks are character driven, and it definitely accomplishes that, and that drives the plot forward. But the overarching plots were very engaging, and I was not bored once this season. I was never like, oh, this is not good enough, or this isn't really what I wanted, because it wasn't what I wanted. Well, that was good.
Yeah, I think I started to get a little worried at the beginning as they started with this Klingon war, and they spent several episodes focusing on like their war with the Klingons, and I kind of felt like if that's what they're going to do the whole season, it would have ended up being kind of boring. You can only take it so many interesting places with just a normal war. And they completely flipped it around after that, which I appreciated.
Yeah, I completely agree because I think we discussed that within the first couple episodes, because we always talk about the episodes after we watch them. And that was definitely a shared concern of ours where I was like, I enjoy the Klingon aspect and I like getting to know the depth of their culture, but at the same time, I don't want a whole season of it. Which, let's talk about the Klingons for a second, because this was a major reason a lot of people didn't like this show at the beginning.
Yes, the redesign of the Klingons. I was very iffy at first, but I'm
liked
okay
it.
with it now.
I kind of went into it when we first find out about the Klingon redesign, which I think was before the show aired, and a lot of people were already buzzing about it. You gotta just leave your expectations of Klingons at the door and just view this as a completely new version of that, which some people don't like. They want their nostalgia and their old designs, which there's nothing wrong with that per se. I was just very open-minded to this new season because it looked so beautiful, and I was really intrigued by the trailers and the casting, and so I was pretty open to the Klingon, especially redesign-wise. The really only thing I was hesitant with the Klingons is what we already mentioned with how the plot was going at the beginning.
Yeah, I felt like really the redesign happened because when Star Trek first came out and they had to come up with all these alien races, physical makeup effects could only go so far.
Plus, it's expensive.
And it's expensive. So you had little things like, well, Vulcans and Romulans get their little pointy ears, and then we'll put one prosthetic on their forehead for Klingons and things like that. Whereas they have the ability now, especially for a show of this budget, to be like, no, we can really go big with this race and make them stand out. And I think that's what they chose to do, and I was okay with it. They looked a little goofy at first, like a little bit like Coneheads. And they still do. But because this season spent so long on their like culture and you getting to know them, it very much became normalized very quickly.
That's what I was going to say. I think the way they delve into the Klingon culture and their religious aspects of their culture was so in-depth and engaging that it made me look past the redesign or my hesitancies with it very quickly, and I was just like, all right, I'm sold.
Yeah, I think ultimately what the first part of this season definitely does, it says, if you want this to be just like all the other Star Treks, you will be unhappy, which I think is to an extent true. If that's all you want out of it, you probably would be unhappy with this show.
I personally, as someone who has watched every single other Star Trek show, multiple times for some, and I grew up on them, I was really excited for something different, and this show very much delivered that.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest surprises was as they get more into the spore drive, which allows them to essentially teleport anywhere, and Stamets gains the ability to interact with it. When they jump to the alternate universe, that's when everything I felt like really got far more interesting for me. I was like, okay, Klingon War, and I felt like they just like blasted it up to like 11. We're like, we're gonna do something crazy, which parallel universes are not that unique, but I think the way they went about it was very cool.
And with that mid-season kickoff to this parallel universe comes our big villain reveal, which we suspected from the very beginning after like one episode with him in it, because I think Lorca is introduced in episode 3 or 4.
2.
Is it at the end of episode 2?
Yeah, because he picks her up, yep.
So Lorca is introduced at the end of episode 2, and I just got a funny vibe from him at first. And I was like, and a lot of people were pissed because they were like, this is not what a Star Trek captain should be. And especially as his character developed in those first like half of the season, they were like, no, a good captain, a Star Trek captain, like this is not what it's about. And they were right, because he ends up being a villain.
Well, yeah, which is funny. So if that's your complaint, it worked out because you get to this alternate universe and you find out that their Lorca was not their universe's Lorca. It was the current universe they were in's Lorca who got stuck there and he was trying to find a way back. So you think it was a big accident they popped into this parallel universe as they're jumping tons of times to like try and
like 200 and something
destroy a Klingon ship. Yeah, and they end up getting zapped here. It was all part of his plan because he's been trying to overthrow this empire the entire time.
Well, not only that, but they added the extra creepy factor of the fact that he went back and groomed Burnham, which is disturbing as hell.
Yeah, because they were together in his universe, and that's why he originally picked her up and like groomed her. It was really quite creepy, but it made a lot of his actions make sense.
Yeah, it did. And it's one of those like twist moments where you're like, ooh, now I want to go back and rewatch and pick up on all that. Because it's totally there.
Yeah, I definitely felt like there were some big hints along the way.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And the biggest one just being in his attitude and how he like
that
treats
and his
people.
Light sensitivity.
Yeah, and the big one.
We didn't have the correlation for that until you pop into the new universe.
But overall, I thought that was a really cool twist and turned it on its head because I wasn't expecting that until they started to really play at it, like that episode. And I was just surprised. It's not often a show just straight up makes me go, oh, I did not expect that.
You also have Philippa Giorgio? Is that Giorgio, who was Burnham's captain in the original universe, and she gets killed off in the first 2 episodes, and Burnham's all broken up about it. That like kicks off her first half of the season arc, and then you get to this parallel universe, and you find out that she is
Emperor.
Emperor. There we go. She's the emperor in that universe, and she's not very nice, and so she kind of turns into a villain. Which is interesting to have this alternate universe re-emergence of this character who's completely different from the original character. And then you think she's going to be good for a little while, and then in the last episode it bounces back that she's not. She was very fascinating to me.
Yeah, I think ultimately she was a good villain because she wasn't always a villain. And she still isn't, because the way this series ends with her going off with our freedom.
She's kind of a neutral chaotic? Or a chaotic neutral? Is that the term? No? What would you say?
I would more say, like, chaotic evil.
Okay.
Because I wouldn't say, like, she's all the time evil, because the chaotic, sometimes she's like, you know what?
She's in between neutral and evil.
You know what? You convinced me. I'll be good this time. Like, and she has a little bit of, like...
That's why I said neutral, because neutral is you're evil or good depending on what benefits you in the moment. Which is kind of how she operates. But she skews evil.
Yeah, I would say skews evil. I can agree to that. But... that makes for a very interesting character, that tends to be doing her own thing, whatever she wants, and then occasionally will be like, you know what, okay, I'll do this.
Well, and it also created a very interesting interaction with her and Burnham, because Burnham obviously has this very conflicted feelings about her causing the death of her captain, and then coming to terms with this new captain, who alternate universe also had a relationship with her, but it was very different. So seeing her interact with essentially her mentor, when she's not her mentor, was just a really interesting kind of minor arc for Burnham. I thought it was really interesting and really added depth to Burnham's character.
No, and I think overall that was kind of the arc for Burnham this season, is having to deal with all these people who are not exactly who they seem or say they are, or and so she's dealing with that. She's dealing with Lorca, and she's also dealing with Ash Tyler, which is another interesting plot point this season.
But what's interesting about Burnham's character in dealing with all of that is I feel like shows, movies, books, all types of media fall into the trope very easily with those situations where it's the, oh, woe is me, I've been betrayed, pity thing. And they do not do this in this show. Or if they do it, it's at a very small, like, acknowledgement moment, but then it's moved past in a good way. Like, it's not just dismissed, but it's also not drawn out like a lot of shows rely on obnoxiously.
No, I completely agree. There is no cheap drama in this show. It all feels very natural. So, like, when Ash Tyler, which I just mentioned, is responsible for the death of Stamets' husband...
I cried.
You get a really good scene there where Stamets, confronts him, and you get that emotion, and then you move on. And whereas in a lower quality show, they would have taken the rest of the episode to show that drama and make it unfold. And the same thing with a lot of Burnham's arcs this season. She covers a lot of emotional ground as a character and a lot of growth that you felt like they probably could have stretched out to be like 3 seasons if they were going for the CW level drama.
It's also interesting that we essentially have 3 different types of villains and 3 different character villains in this season, especially for a pilot season. That's a pretty bold move. And it's also something that can get very muddled very easily, especially in a TV show format. And I don't feel like it was. They each were very individualized or connected in a very clear way once they were revealed, and it never felt messy to me.
No, I agree. I think it was clear they had an arc for each of these characters planned from the get-go, and I think that's ultimately what, gave the plot its strength, and also made things exciting for what comes next for all these characters. So let's talk about the finale, so we can talk about kind of where we think the show might go. And the biggest thing being that with Georgiou and Burnham, they end up ending the war with the Klingons by essentially putting a bomb in the middle of the core of their planet and then giving it to the Klingons, saying, don't blow your planet up. Like, but essentially stop warring with us and figure out how to do your own thing.
Well, because the problem was the Klingon clans were so divided when they came back from the parallel universe. They had all split into, I think it was 24 different clans. And so they all have their own split agendas, and they're all just like wrecking the universe. And so you have this Klingon spy who has been throughout the entire season, and she ends up uniting all of the clans, which could be good, could go badly. We'll see.
I think that's interesting because we no longer have to deal with the war with the Klingons.
Yeah, that would be nice. Let's move on to a new plot point. The finale was also very interesting. They had some really big set pieces. Most of the time we've been on the ship for the show, whether it's the original universe or alternate universe. We've had a couple planet episodes, but they were not overly involved set design-wise, and there were a lot of big set pieces in the finale that were super fun. And I really liked that they explored more of the like alien aspects, because that is the heart of Star Trek in my opinion. Like Star Trek and Star Wars, you gotta get your alien pieces of it more than just like, oh, we have a few here and there. Like, no, show me the in-depth like underground like markets that they have and stuff like that, which is very much in this finale, and I thought it was an excellent way to expand that universe.
Yeah, I felt like they're really taking the time to expand things. We get to see the Klingon homeworld, at least a small part of it, and I think they did a lot right with the finale, and they pretty much tied up all of the character loose ends, which is pretty interesting and pretty risky for a show. I feel like I said, a lot of times, and most of them are lower quality shows, will try to leave you a bunch of strings at the very end.
They leave you with too many questions and not enough answers, and this left you with really no questions. They do have a surprise going into the next season, which we'll get to in a minute. But you, like Steven said, they tie up all these strings really nicely, and it just was very satisfying.
Yeah, I really liked that Burnham reached a place where she's no longer so tortured. She's driven now, and she's kind of reached, and she's been redeemed by Starfleet. She's no longer like working off her prison sentence, essentially, which I thought was cool. And I felt like Georgiou got to run off on her own. I'm sure she'll be back at a later season.
I'm sure multiple characters who went off on their own will be back. I think they spent too much time on these characters to not have them pop back up. So all of that leads us to the very final moments of season 1, which throw a huge wrench into things. I was literally screaming at our TV in excitement. So the finale, hopefully you've already watched this season, that's why you're watching this whole review, but in case you haven't, they pick up a distress signal. They're on their way to go pick up their new captain for their ship because they're not making Saru or Burnham captain, which is interesting. It's kind of a bummer, but it leaves them places to grow. And they're going through hyperspace. They pick up a priority 1 distress signal.
Yeah.
And then he's like trying to unscramble the little ship ID or whatever, and it pulls up with NCC 17, and I was like, are they doing it? And they fucking did it. We have Star Trek Enterprise coming in. You got Pike on the mic. You get Pike showing up and on the comms and saying that Enterprise is there and they need help. And oh my god, I'm so excited.
And then the ship comes in, and that's really cool that we get to see some Enterprise action, especially before, all the people get there. All our normal Enterprise people get there, which is a cool opportunity because I can't believe that they would ever put like Spock or James Kirk on the show.
Who knows?
But
I'm
who
okay
knows?
with them not doing that.
Yeah, this is a bold move though, and I think it's going to start off pretty interestingly.
I'm extremely excited for it. Let us know what you think about that reveal.
I'm mostly just excited to see where this show can go now that they have freedom. There's not necessarily... they'll have a fresh slate, essentially, to bring in a new plot. I'm pulling for the Borg. The Borg are my favorite, and I'm pulling for them.
If you're going to bring in Klingon, which is the most classic to have from the Star Trek, bring in the frickin' Borg, please. They're my favorite.
It's been too long,
That's
and
true.
I think it would be a cool season. But ultimately, I'm good with whatever they do. I'm just excited for them to be able to start fresh and maybe get to do more exploring and more like, let's go to weird worlds, have weird one-off episodes where things happen, because some of the stronger episodes this season were the ones that were a little weirder because they weren't following just the main Klingon war plot.
Like Steven said, this show has the opportunity to go in many different directions, and I have no idea where they're going to go with it, which makes me extremely excited and optimistic, because for a show that has such a long history and rich history, being unpredictable is good. And I think that's going to be their benefit going forward.
We also wanted to briefly mention the fact that this show looks so good.
It's the prettiest show I've ever seen in my life. And the intro is excellent as well. We were just talking about this the other day. The intro is one of my favorite TV show intros of all time.
But yeah, ultimately, this show is so interesting to look at. Their space shots and their ship shots are so well done that it's movie quality, which is really cool.
I can't believe that something that high quality with that big of a budget made it on CBS. And CBS All Access to boot.
And they put it online. It feels like a little bit of a death sentence.
We didn't think it was going to get renewed for season 2, which it has been, if you didn't know that.
Which is excellent, and I hope it continues to go forward, because somehow on this show, yeah, it's visually like high budget. It's well done. Technically, it done well. Like, it looks great. And it's a quality show. There's quality writing and everything. It's like almost like a concoction for cancellation. It's too good.
It's too good.
Overall, guys, we were so surprised at this show and just the quality of it, how much fun we've had watching it, and it's just been very cool to watch Star Trek on TV, and especially by the end, you feel like, wow, no, this is Star Trek. Like, and it's cool to experience that. I feel like Star Trek is one of those franchises that everyone should try to experience like that at some point, and I think this season does a good job. And everyone should go watch it and give it a fair shot all the way through, and don't just like judge it off just the pilot episode, which even though we liked, I can understand why that one's not for everyone.
And if for some reason you've watched this entire review all the way through and haven't watched this show yet, even if you are not a Star Trek alumni, essentially, if you are intimidated by the history of the show, I think that you can go into the show knowing nothing about previous Star Trek franchises and still really enjoy what you're watching and not feel like you're missing out on key pieces. And we really recommend you give this show money. Go subscribe to the service. I hate saying that. I think it's stupid to have it behind a paywall. But I think it's worth it, honestly, and I really encourage you to go check it out. I think the first, 1 or 2 episodes are actually free up on their website, so you should be able to at least watch the 1 or 2 of them without hitting the paywall. But, yeah, go support it. Go check it out. Give it a chance if, for some reason, you watched this all the way through and haven't watched it. And if you have watched the show, let us know your opinion. It is the entire reason we have this channel, is because we want to talk to you guys about what you think about things that we love or don't love. And, yeah, let us know what you thought about this entire season. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Do you like the Orville better? We don't. But if you like this review and like our TV show style reviews, give this video a thumbs up. It lets us know that you want to see more of them. And if you want to see more of our content, you can subscribe and join the BS Review family. We do have a ton of different types of content on here. We have video games, comics, movies, TV shows, all the nerdy things under the sun. So if you want to check out any of those, you can look at some of them over here. And as always, we will see you in our next video. Bye, guys.